When the time came to shut down the master control booth, I didn't hesitate. I knew I needed to act fast before anyone came in to check on me. With a few swift adjustments, I switched off the live assist mode and put the system back into its fully automated broadcast schedule. That was enough excitement for our local audience tonight. My job was done. Now it was time to leave and focus on something that mattered more. A drink to mark the end of this long, chaotic day. I wasn't worried about the fallout. Let the general manager, the FCC, or anyone else try to piece it all together. They'd figure it out eventually, but I'd handle that when the time came. I wasn't the type to lose sleep over people pointing fingers. It was clear to me that I'd done what needed to be done, and the rest? That was their problem. I headed straight to Frankie's on Roswell Road, a buzzing sports bar where the drinks were cold and the chatter was endless. Walking in, I ordered a beer, leaned back, and let the game on the screen take my attention. Monday Night Football was on, and while I wasn't in the mood to cheer for a losing team, the Saints' dominance over the Falcons didn't surprise me. By the time I had downed a few beers, the final score flashed on the screen. New Orleans 23, Atlanta 3. The Saints had been waiting for their chance to shine in their home stadium after the hurricane. And tonight, they came to crush the competition. The bar was full of people dissecting the game, their animated voices bouncing off the walls. I could hear snippets of conversations about what had happened earlier at the station, too. My little stunt hadn't gone unnoticed. But no one dared approach me, which was exactly how I preferred it. I drank alone, keeping my focus on the game and the cold glass in my hand. When the game wrapped up, I flagged down the bartender and asked if I could leave my car in the lot overnight. He agreed without hesitation. "Good call," he said, eyeing me knowingly before calling me a cab. It was a short ride back to my quiet neighborhood in Sandy Springs, and I was content knowing I'd made the right call to leave my car behind. That's where I'll leave this part of the story. But to make sense of how things spiraled to this point, I need to go back to the beginning. My name is David Henson, though most people just call me Dave. I'm a broadcast engineer for WBDK, a CBS affiliate in Atlanta, Georgia. To put it bluntly, I know my stuff. I hold a graduate degree in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT and another in broadcast technologies. I've been in this business for over 22 years, working up and down the East Coast before settling here in Atlanta about 5 years ago. At 46 years old, I take care of myself. I'm 6 feet 3 inches, about 190 pounds, with dark hair, starting to gray at the temples. The gray doesn't bother me. It's just a sign of experience. My small mustache gets a touch-up now and then to stay sharp, but that's as far as I go with appearances. I wouldn't call myself a movie star, but I've heard the word handsome thrown my way often enough. Now let's talk about Laura, my wife of 22 years. At first glance, she's everything a man could ask for. She's 5 feet 5 inches, around 135 pounds, with long blonde hair that stops just at her shoulders. She's stunning, the kind of woman who turns heads without trying. People seem drawn to her. Something I once admired but have grown to see differently over time. For the last 18 months, she's been working as a secretary for Pastor Mark Dawson, the head of our local church. She's always been involved in church lives. I didn't question it when she took the job. But last Friday, something didn't sit right with me. I had a rare window of free time during lunch and thought it'd be nice to surprise Laura and take her out to eat. It was a rainy afternoon, and I parked near the church's side entrance to avoid the downpour. When I stepped in her office, I found it empty. I figured she'd be back soon, so I decided to wait. But then I heard voices coming from Pastor Dawson's office. It was Laura's voice, clear as day, and she sounded unusually excited. I moved closer to the door, careful to stay out of sight, and strained to catch the conversation. That's when I heard her say something that stopped me cold. Monday evening, I stood there, frozen, as Laura spoke with an unsettling mix of excitement and anticipation. She talked about how much she looked forward to spending more time together, something made possible, she noted, because of my work commitments covering Monday Night Football games. I listened in disbelief as their conversation took a turn for the intimate. Words like La Quinta in and longing for physical closeness hit me like a gut punch. It wasn't just flirtation, it was a full-blown plan. They weren't being careful, either. The casual confidence in their voices made it clear this wasn't the first time. A surge of anger and disgust rose inside me. Every fiber of my being wanted to storm in, confront them, and let the chips fall where they may. But I stopped myself, not out of fear, but because I knew that acting on raw emotion in that moment could lead to something I'd regret, something irreversible. My strength was in control, not in rash decisions. I quietly stepped back, retracing my steps through the side entrance. The church had security cameras, but I'd entered through a door they likely didn't monitor, so I was confident I hadn't been seen. As I climbed into my car, I gripped the steering wheel, steadying myself. Driving away felt like the smarter move, even if it burned me inside. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. I headed home, knowing I wouldn't get anything meaningful done at work after what I'd just uncovered. I called the station, told them I wasn't feeling well, and needed the rest of the day off. Laura wouldn't be back until after 4 p.m., so I had a few hours to think, to process everything without distractions. It didn't take much analysis to figure it out. Laura was having an affair with Pastor Mark Dawson. In my mind, his title didn't matter anymore. He was no pastor. From now on, he was just Mark, or better yet, that spineless bastard. The questions racing through my head weren't born out of self-doubt, but a need for clarity. How long had this been going on? Where had it started? What made her betray me and our family in such a calculated way? Some people might choose to avoid digging into the details of an affair, but I wasn't one of them. I needed answers. This wasn't about wallowing in pain. It was about uncovering the truth and dealing with it head-on. Once I got home, I brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat on the patio. The cool breeze and warm sunlight steadied me as I began piecing together the puzzle. I wasn't blindsided by this entirely. Looking back, there had been small signs I'd dismissed. Hushed phone calls, a few unexplained absences, a new energy in her demeanor. Things I chalked up to her job or her personality. Trust had blinded me, and now that trust was shattered. I wasn't the type to fall apart over betrayal, but that didn't mean I wasn't angry. Furious, even. Laura had made a mockery of the vows we took all those years ago, and while I didn't own her or her choices, I'd be damned if I let her disrespect me like this without consequences. By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, I knew I couldn't sit around and play the waiting game. Confronting her right then wouldn't give me what I needed, facts. Without a solid understanding of how deep this affair went, I'd be fighting blind. So, I decided to avoid her return altogether. I left the house, went to the station to pick up a few essentials, and spoke briefly with my boss about taking some time off. This wasn't a matter of escaping the situation. It was about buying myself time to strategize. If Laura and Mark thought they were going to get away with this unscathed, they were sorely mistaken. I had no intention of being passive or forgiving. I was going to handle this like the man I am, calm, calculated, and in control. I spoke with my boss, explaining I needed the rest of the week to take care of some personal matters. He didn't pry, just nodded and told me to let him know if I needed anything. With that out of the way, I headed to Frankie's to pass the time until I had to face the situation at home. Around 5 p.m., I called Laura to let her know I wouldn't be home for dinner. Her reaction was typical, irritation masked as concern. "Oh, great," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, just so you know, I had plans tonight. Big plans. And now you've gone and ruined them." She made some comment about being in the mood and how that was off the table now. The audacity was laughable. I knew exactly why she was in such a mood. Bastard Bob had gotten her all worked up, not me. The idea of her even hinting at intimacy after what I'd uncovered was pathetic. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before I responded. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I've already made my plans. You can keep your excitement to yourself, or take care of it however you see fit. I won't be catering to it." Her tone turned cold. "Don't count on it, pal. If you think you can talk to me like that, you're going to regret it." I smiled to myself. "Oh, Laura, I already regret a lot of things. This isn't one of them." When I finally got home, it was close to 10:30 p.m. The house was quiet, but the locked bedroom door made it clear she was still up. I knocked firmly, more amused than annoyed. "Fine," I called through the door. "If that's how you want it, enjoy your night. Don't expect me to cater to your needs anytime soon." I headed to the spare bedroom without waiting for a response, satisfied at the thought of how this would get under her skin. She could stew in her own frustration while I got a decent night's sleep. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, coffee in hand, staring daggers at me. The tension was palpable, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of addressing it. Instead, I grinned as if nothing was wrong. "No need to get up and make breakfast for me, honey," I said casually. "I'll grab something on the way to the golf course." I grabbed my keys and headed out the door before she could respond. My phone rang minutes later. It was Laura, of course. I ignored it, waiting until I was parked to check her voicemail. Her message was furious and unhinged. "You jerk! How dare you treat me like this? Get back here right now, you bastard!" I shook my head, smirking. "No, Laura," I muttered to myself. "The only bastard here is Bob. You got the wrong guy." But golf wasn't on my agenda. Instead, I drove straight to the church. There was no way I was going to sit through one of Mark's sermons ever again, but his office would serve my purpose well. It was still early, so the place was deserted, just as I'd expected. I used the key Laura had for her job, letting myself in quietly. I wasted no time. My first task was installing the micro cameras and microphones I prepared. One in her office, one in his, and a transmitter hidden in the supply closet across the hall. I connected the receiver to my car's electrical system so I could monitor their conversations and movements remotely. They wouldn't have a clue. With the surveillance in place, I turned to their desks. Laura's was disappointingly clean. No damning notes or obvious clues. But her calendar caught my eye. A prominent asterisk marked next Monday's date. It fit perfectly with what I'd overheard before. I took mental notes and moved on to Mark's office. His office yielded more promising results. I combed through his filing cabinets, sifting through stacks of papers until I hit gold: receipts. Specifically, several from the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. They weren't just random bookings either. A quick glance at the dates confirmed what I suspected. 2 of the receipts were from late 2005, during weeks I'd been out of town for conferences. The man didn't even have the decency to pay out of pocket. He'd charged the stays to the church under pastoral retreats. Disgusted but satisfied with the evidence, I made quick copies and put everything back in its place. Time was ticking, and I didn't want to push my luck by staying any longer. With the receipts tucked securely in my bag, I drove to the golf course. I parked in my usual spot and headed into the clubhouse. It was important to establish that I'd been there, just in case anyone asked. I nursed a Sprite at a corner table, going over the receipts and organizing my next steps. Everything was falling into place. Laura and Mark thought they could outsmart me, but they had no idea what they were dealing with. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The discovery of those motel receipts in Mark's files was infuriating. Not only was he having an affair with my wife, but he had also billed the church for his sleazy escapades, labeling them as conference room rentals or pastoral retreats. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft disguised as piety. And to think Laura and I had contributed financially to that church. Never again. From this point on, they wouldn't see a single dime from me. My gut told me this affair hadn't started recently. Based on the dates, it had been going on for at least a year, possibly longer. That meant Mark likely began his pursuit before Laura even started working at the church. She had left a respectable job at the Telfer Corporation, where she'd worked as a receptionist, to take the secretary position at the church. She claimed it was because of its proximity to home and her desire to serve, but now it was clear the so-called perks of the job went far beyond convenience. The thought made my blood boil. How could I have been so blind? The signs had been there, but I dismissed them, too trusting to question her motives. That naivety was over. They thought they'd gotten away with it, but I was about to teach them both the cost of underestimating me. I returned to my car, retrieved my receiver setup, and tuned into the feed from the cameras and microphones I'd installed. Moments later, Mark strolled into his office and dialed a number. I couldn't hear both sides of the conversation since I hadn't bugged his phone, but hearing his end was enough to piece it together. "Yeah, Laura, I'm at the church. Got here as soon as you called. What's got you so upset?" he said. A pause followed, then Mark continued. "Really? Has he done that before?" Another pause. "I see. And what do you think triggered that reaction?" He sounded concerned, but also irritated, as if the situation was an inconvenience to him. Then he lowered his voice, and his tone became cautious. "You don't suppose he's suspicious of us, do you?" Another pause. Then he chuckled. "All right, well, you can get back at him Monday night." With that, he hung up. I could feel my jaw clenching as I recorded every word. Before shutting off the receiver, I caught him muttering under his breath, something I couldn't fully make out, but I recorded it anyway. Even the smallest details might prove useful later. When I got home, I knew I'd be walking into a frosty atmosphere. Laura was silent as I came in, the tension between us palpable. I ignored her and busied myself with some household chores. Mowing the lawn, cleaning up the basement, anything to keep myself moving while I processed my next steps. At dinner, she finally broke the silence. "What's going on with you lately?" she asked, trying to sound casual but failing. "Why have you been acting so different?" I smirked, leaning back in my chair. "Considering you locked me out of our bedroom last night, maybe you should be reflecting on your own actions, Laura. I went out for one night, and you acted like it was some kind of betrayal. Whatever this is, it's on you." Her frustration boiled over. "Damn you," she snapped. I stayed calm, meeting her outburst with a level tone. "Really, Laura? Is that how a so-called devout Christian woman talks? Then again, your actions hardly reflect your faith." Her face flushed with guilt, so obvious it was almost comical. She tried to recover, stammering something incoherent before excusing herself from the table. I didn't stop her. Watching her squirm was satisfaction enough for now. Later that evening, as I relaxed in the family room, she walked in. Her eyes were red and slightly swollen. She'd been crying. She lingered for a moment, as if waiting for me to say something. When I didn't, she disappeared again, leaving me in peace. When it was time for bed, I headed straight to the spare bedroom. A few minutes later, Laura appeared in the doorway, hesitant but clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "What's the matter?" I asked casually without looking up. "Aren't you going to join me in bed?" she asked, her voice softer now. I didn't bother hiding my smirk. "Nope. You made it clear that intimacy isn't on the agenda, remember? So I figure I'll sleep alone and actually get a good night's rest." She didn't reply, just turned on her heel and hurried out. I didn't care where she went. For now, I was focused on building my case and making sure she and Mark would have no escape from the fallout of their actions. Sunday morning, Laura woke me up at 8 a.m., already dressed for church. She stood by the bed, arms crossed, and asked, "Are you coming to church today?" I didn't even bother sitting up. "Nope," I said flatly. "You go ahead. Be the perfect church lady. I'll enjoy a peaceful day right here." Her expression flickered, a mix of confusion and sadness, though she quickly masked it. I could tell she was starting to sense something was off, but she wasn't ready to confront it yet. Without another word, she turned and left. I heard the car pull out of the driveway a short while later. The rest of the day passed quietly. She tried to initiate a conversation in the afternoon, but I cut her off with a curt, "Not now. I'm busy." She retreated, and we both stayed in our separate corners of the house. That was fine by me. Monday morning, I left the house early, making sure to avoid any interaction with Laura. As I backed out of the driveway, my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was tearful, shaky. "David, I'm sorry. I love you. I don't know what's happening, but I just want us to fix this. Can we talk tonight? Please." I kept my tone measured. "We'll discuss it when I get home," I said, ending the call before she could say more. After notifying my boss I'd be unavailable for the day except for the Monday night football game, I set my sights on my next target, the Lakina Inn in Roswell. At the lobby, I approached a young man named Kevin behind the front desk. "Hey, Kevin," I said, leaning in slightly. "I'll get straight to the point. I believe my wife is cheating on me, and I have reason to suspect she'll be here tonight with another man. I need access to the room to verify it." Kevin's eyes widened, and he shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I don't think I can help you with that." I cut him off. "I'll make it worth your while. 2 tickets to next week's Falcons game, front row." His hesitation melted into intrigue. "Make it 4 tickets, and you've got a deal." I smiled. "Done." He handed me the key to the only whirlpool suite they had available. Little did he know, I wasn't just planning to verify my suspicions. I intended to gather irrefutable evidence. Setting the trap. Inside the room, I worked quickly, planting 2 miniature microphones and a pair of micro cameras. One was positioned near the whirlpool tub, the other discreetly hidden in a fixture by the bed. To capture both sides of their conversations, I also installed a bug in the room's phone line. Once everything was in place, I ran a test. The audio was crystal clear, and the camera angles covered exactly what I needed. Satisfied, I returned the key to Kevin and handed him the tickets. Thanks, Kevin. Enjoy the game. With hours to spare, I turned my focus to securing my own position. First, I stopped by our bank and withdrew half of the funds from both our checking and savings accounts, converting them into cashier's checks. Next, I canceled our joint credit cards, ensuring she wouldn't have access to them. From there, I drove to my broker's office to adjust our investment accounts. By the time I left, our portfolio had been split evenly, avoiding the need to sell assets and incur tax penalties. The paperwork required both our signatures, but I was confident Laura wouldn't dare contest it. Meeting the attorney. My final stop was my attorney's office. We discussed divorce proceedings in detail, agreeing to pursue a no-fault divorce with an equal division of assets. However, I instructed him to prepare a secondary option, filing on the grounds of adultery, if she showed any resistance. "You're being smart about this," he said as we finalized the documents. "It's always better to stay in control." "That's the plan," I replied. Preparation complete. By the time evening rolled around, I was ready to head to the station for the Monday night football game. My steps were deliberate, my mind clear. I wasn't the kind of man to wallow or wait. Laura and Mark had made their choices. Now it was my turn to make mine. After leaving the attorney's office, I turned my phone back on to find several messages from Laura. Her words were laced with concern, her tone pleading as she asked me to come home so we could talk things through before the game. I read the messages with a mix of disgust and cold clarity. Her attempts at damage control were too little, too late. The truth was clear. Her supposed concern wasn't for me or our marriage. She was trying to keep me in the dark while she carried on with Mark. I had made a decision. If Laura didn't show up at the motel tonight, it might mean there was a sliver of hope for reconciliation. But if she went through with it, there was no turning back. Her actions tonight would determine the future of our marriage. Monday Night Football and monitoring the trap. By 8 p.m., I engaged the station's automated system, ensuring the game was broadcasting without a hitch. Once that was set, I focused on the setup in the La Quinta Inn. At exactly 8:15, Mark entered the room, his movements casual as if he had no care in the world. I watched and listened through the feed. He picked up the phone and dialed. "Hey, I've arrived. Can you come over as soon as possible?" His tone was easy, confident. A female voice responded, though I couldn't hear her side of the call. "I'll be there shortly," was Mark's only reply before ending the call. Before hanging up, he muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite make out. I made a note to review the audio later, certain it could provide additional context. Laura's arrival. By 8:45, Laura arrived. I watched as she entered the room, her body language unmistakable, eager and unrestrained. The way she moved, the way her face lit up when she saw him, it was the final nail in the coffin. Any shred of doubt I had about her betrayal evaporated. Their conversation confirmed everything. It wasn't just an affair. It was a relationship built on deceit and lies, and they reveled in their duplicity. The depth of their involvement was sickening, especially considering their public personas, a respected pastor and a devoted church secretary. Hypocrisy didn't even begin to cover it. The moment of truth. The surveillance revealed it all. I watched as they embraced, the cameras capturing every damning detail. She perched on the bed, her posture inviting, her expression filled with anticipation. Their conversation turned intimate, the kind of dialogue that would make anyone's stomach churn. It wasn't just physical. It was a display of her complete emotional investment in this man, a man who wasn't me. Her words were laced with passion, and his responses matched her fervor. Their actions were graphic, undeniable proof of their betrayal. I didn't need to keep watching to understand the depth of their depravity. but I made sure every moment was recorded. This evidence wasn't just for my own validation. It was for the battles to come. Retaliation in motion. As the scene unfolded, I felt no sadness, only determination. They had made their choices, and now they would face the consequences. I made a swift decision. Using the station's tools, I switched the broadcast feed to display a live stream of the motel room. Phones started ringing almost immediately, the switchboard lighting up with calls. The reaction was exactly what I expected. Mark and Laura's reputations would be irreparably destroyed, and the facade they had so carefully maintained would crumble before their eyes. I wasn't finished yet. This was only the beginning. As the fallout from my live broadcast began, I steeled myself for what was coming. The consequences were inevitable, but I didn't regret my decision for a second. They had betrayed me, and now the world would see them for who they truly were. I picked up my phone and dialed Laura's number. My heart didn't race, nor did I feel nervous. I was calm, in control, and ready to face her. The phone rang, and I imagined her glancing at the caller ID, probably with that same smug look she wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "It's David." I heard her mutter, likely to Mark. "I'm not answering. Let's see how he likes that. Keep going, honey." The sheer arrogance of it made me smirk. I hung up and called again, my patience waning. This time, she hesitated, and I could hear her fumbling with the phone. "Hello, David," she said coldly, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Where are you, Laura? What are you up to?" I asked, my voice sharp and demanding. "I went shopping since you didn't bother to call earlier. Now I'm just grabbing a bite before heading home," she lied effortlessly. "Shopping? At this hour?" I shot back, my tone dripping with skepticism. "Yeah, and I plan to splurge," she retorted, her voice tinged with defiance. "Fantastic, Laura. Thanks for being such a wonderful wife," I replied, the sarcasm in my voice cutting like a blade. "Don't talk to me like that, you jerk," she snapped. "I don't know what's gotten into you. Goodbye." She hung up before I could say another word. I stared at the phone, shaking my head. Her lies were pathetic, and her audacity only fueled my determination. Calling the motel. Instead of calling her again, I went straight to the source. I dialed the front desk of the La Quina Inn. "Kevin, it's David. Watching Monday Night Football tonight?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "No, not tonight," he replied. "Well, you might want to turn it on. Also, could you ring the Whirlpool suite for me?" After a pause, Mark's voice came through the line. "Hello. What do you want, David?" His tone was casual, but carried an edge of irritation. "It's simple, Mark. Put Laura on the phone." There was a brief shuffle before her voice replaced his. "David, why are you calling here?" she asked, her tone defensive. "Laura, I know everything," I said bluntly. "The cheating, the lies. It's over. I'm filing for divorce, and you're getting out. Mark, don't think you're walking away from this unscathed either." "What's wrong with you, David?" Laura snapped, trying to sound indignant. "You've been acting insane lately." "It's over, Laura. Maybe you should tune into Monday Night Football for a change. Enjoy the show." I ended the call, my decision final. The fallout. On the monitor, I saw her grab the remote and switch on the TV. Her face twisted in horror as the live feed revealed her and Mark in the motel room, their betrayal exposed to the entire city. "Oh no. Oh no. Oh no," she stammered, scrambling to dress. Mark cursed as he tried to gather his things. "I'll destroy that son of a bitch," he growled, oblivious to the cameras still recording his every move. I chuckled to myself. "Watch what you mumble, Mark," I muttered under my breath. "It might come back to haunt you." Once they left the room, I shut down the monitors and let the broadcast finish. I powered down the live assist mode, returning the system to its fully automated schedule. Grabbing the tape and a few personal items from my desk, I left the broadcast booth for what I knew would likely be the last time. Facing Laura. That night, I ended up at Frankie's, where the fallout from my halftime show dominated every conversation. People whispered and speculated, but I didn't care. I had done what needed to be done. By the time I got home, it was late. Laura was sitting in the darkened living room, her face streaked with tears, the phone off the hook. She wept loudly, but it stirred nothing in me. "How could you do this to me, David?" she sobbed. "After all these years, how could you?" I stared at her, my voice cold and steady. No, Laura. The real question is, how could you do this to me? I turned and headed to bed. I'm drunk. We'll talk tomorrow, I said over my shoulder, leaving her to her guilt and tears. The following morning, Laura was still in the same spot, looking exhausted and defeated. She hadn't slept, but that wasn't my problem. I walked past her, grabbed the phone, and placed it back on the hook. It immediately began to ring. For the next hour and a half, I fielded calls from family, friends, church members, my former boss, and even my daughters. They were all shocked and disturbed by what they had seen. I didn't sugarcoat anything. Yes, it was harsh, I admitted, but sometimes people need to see the truth, no matter how ugly it is. Laura sat silently as I handled each call, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. I had no sympathy to offer her. She had made her bed, and now she would lie in it. The fallout continued, and I handled it with the same resolve I'd maintained from the start. The phone rang incessantly. Family, friends, church members, and even Mrs. Mark Dawson. She was furious but also desperate, asking if I had a copy of the broadcast. I assured her that I had everything securely stored and would provide it if needed. Her reaction suggested she wasn't just a bystander in this. She was grappling with her own version of betrayal. The reactions were a mixed bag. Some criticized me for airing such explicit content, including Laura's parents, who called me vindictive for making it public. Others expressed quiet support, recognizing that this was an unimaginable situation I hadn't asked for. I let their words roll off me. I wasn't looking for validation or condemnation. I had acted in the only way that felt right. Laura remained teary-eyed, sitting quietly while I finally left the phone off the hook to stop the barrage of calls. I poured myself a coffee and made her a cup as well, setting it on the table in front of her. Here's the deal, I said firmly, sliding the divorce papers and investment documents across the table. I'm filing for divorce, Laura. After what I discovered and what the entire city saw last night, it's clear you've been unfaithful for a long time. This marriage is over. Her lip quivered, but I kept going. These documents outline a no-fault divorce with a 50-50 split of our assets. I need your signature by 5 p.m. today. That gives you enough time to get legal advice if you want. But let me make something clear. After 5:01, if you haven't signed, I'll file on the grounds of adultery and fight for a division of property that reflects our individual contributions. And let's not kid ourselves, I'll come out on top. Her eyes widened as she realized I wasn't bluffing. You don't want that, Laura, I added. It would all become public knowledge, and Atlanta will see exactly what you and Mark have done. Take this deal. It's the best option you've got. But David, I still love you, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Can't we fix this? Please. I'll do whatever it takes. This isn't about love, Laura. It's about the choices you made. You put someone else before our marriage, and I can't forgive that. Get yourself a lawyer and figure this out. Her confession. By mid-afternoon, Laura returned with the signed documents. She sat across from me, her face a mix of resignation and desperation. My lawyer reviewed everything and said the offer is fair under the circumstances, she muttered. Then her voice softened. David, can we at least talk? I want to explain myself. Maybe there's a way forward. I leaned back, deciding to give her the chance to speak. Go ahead, Laura. Explain yourself. She took a deep breath and began. It started before I even began working for Mark. I don't know why. I was content with you. But he had this charisma. He made me feel special in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought he loved me. I nodded, but my expression remained cold. You thought wrong. Her face crumbled, and I didn't hesitate to deliver the final blow. I pulled out my phone and played the recordings I'd saved. 2 choice excerpts from Mark's private conversations. The first one echoed through the room. That idiotic woman better keep this affair hidden from her husband. Despite her sweet and willing nature, she'll be gone soon. It was easy to seduce her, but she needs to go. Laura froze, her face draining of color. I played the second recording. I'll ravage her tonight and fire her tomorrow. If she protests, I'll threaten to expose her to David. I can't risk him finding out. Her hands trembled as the reality set in. So, Sharon, not only did you wreck our marriage, I said, my voice cold and unrelenting, but you also completely misjudged Mark's feelings. To him, you were nothing but a plaything, a toy, and you let him demean you over and over again while I saw you as my wife. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. I never treated you like that because I respected you. I loved you. But now, there's no coming back from this. You destroyed our marriage, and you'll never be happy with me again. You've ruined what we had, and I refuse to live in the shadow of what you've done. The end of the marriage. Laura sat there, sobbing, fully grasping the weight of her actions. When she eventually spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You're right. I don't deserve your forgiveness. She signed the papers without another word, sealing the end of our marriage. I informed her that I would be relocating and gave her time to make arrangements for herself. Financially, I knew she wouldn't be able to keep the house, and I had no interest in staying there. The memories it held were tainted beyond repair. As I stood to leave the room, I looked back at her one last time. You brought this on yourself, Laura. I hope you figure out who you are and what you want, because it clearly wasn't me. And with that, I walked away, ready to leave the wreckage of our life behind and start anew. The divorce agreement stipulated that the house would be sold, with the proceeds split equally between us, just like the rest of our assets. Once Laura signed the papers, I collected them, along with my pre-packed bags, and left the house for good. My first stop was to drop off the documents with my broker. After that, I checked into a hotel for the night, the weight of finality settling over me. The legal fallout. The next day, I met with my attorney, who filed the divorce papers with the county superior court. We also addressed the legal consequences of my actions at the station. He didn't sugarcoat it. There would be significant repercussions. While jail time seemed unlikely, hefty fines and the loss of my broadcasting license were almost certain. The financial penalties could cost me nearly a year's salary, and my career in broadcasting was effectively over, with a mandatory 2-year suspension of my license. The blow was harsh, but there was a silver lining. Tom Turner, TT, a higher-up at the station who had gone through his own bitter divorce, extended an unexpected lifeline. Despite the legal and professional fallout, he sympathized with my situation and offered me a job that complied with FCC restrictions. While it wasn't the on-air career I'd built for years, it was a way forward, and for that, I respected him. Bastard Bob's reckoning. One night at Frankie's, Bastard Bob, decided to confront me. He approached, his face red with anger, his body language screaming for a fight. I let him make the first move, but it was all too predictable. Within seconds, I had him pinned against the bar, my knee pressing into his ribs. Listen closely, Mark, I growled. I don't want to hear from you again. Not a word. Is that clear? His glare didn't waver, but his words were weak. Forget you, he spat. Careful, I warned, pressing my knee harder. I've got a recording of you threatening me. If I take it to the police, you'll be looking at a restraining order. Or worse. You want to test me? He shook his head, his bravado evaporating. To drive the point home, I nudged him sharply in the ribs. Good. Now crawl back to whatever hole you came from, and don't let me see your face again. Mark's life had crumbled since the fallout. He'd been ousted from the church, stripped of his ordination, and faced a costly divorce after his wife sued him on the grounds of adultery. From what I heard, the incriminating video played a major role in her victory. He was now working at a city travel agency, a far cry from the pedestal he once stood on. His charisma might have fooled many, but his reputation was irreparably tarnished. Moving forward. For me, life was moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I'd started casually dating again, meeting a few women who piqued my interest. I wasn't rushing into anything serious, though. I'd abstained from physical intimacy, holding to my belief that it should be reserved for marriage. That might sound outdated to some, but it's a value I still hold dear. When the right person comes along, I'll know, and I'll be ready to build something real with her. Until then, I'm content to wait. Encounters with Laura. Occasionally, I saw Laura at family events, Stephanie's college graduation, Melanie's baby's baptism. I kept things civil, but made it clear that my presence wasn't for her benefit. I had no interest in friendship or rekindling any kind of connection. She seemed burdened, her once vibrant energy replaced by visible regret. It was obvious she wasn't happy. Her decision to betray our marriage had cost her everything, and she knew it. While I could see her pain, it didn't soften me. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Her involvement in the infamous Monday Night Football broadcast had permanently damaged her reputation. People who saw it now viewed her as promiscuous, and while she reportedly received plenty of attention from men, she hadn't accepted any offers. Perhaps she was holding out hope for something better, or maybe she realized that most of them saw her as nothing more than a fleeting conquest. It wasn't a dignified way to live, but it was the path she had chosen. Her actions had led her here, and no amount of regret could undo the damage she caused. As for me, I had let go of the anger and resentment. My focus was on building a better life, free from the pain she left in her wake.